This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Jo Walsh.
She's a friend. Melissa Jo Peltier is a friend of mine. Politically, we're different. She's a good, sincere, committed woman of the left. I'm a reformed megahead, but I'm still of the right. Melissa Jo and I got to know each other through an amazing film that she made that came out in 2021. The Game is Up. I was honored to be in that movie of hers. Disillusioned Trump voters tell their stories. Hey, Melissa Jo, it's still available, right, on Amazon Prime?
It's available on Amazon Prime. You have to pay a little for it, like $3.99 or $4.99, but it's worth it because you don't get commercials and you'll get it in its lovely 5G, 4G picture, which it really looks good there. But we also have it on Tubi and we also have it on YouTube. If you Google it, The Game is Up documentary. You can watch it free there, but you'll have to put up with some ads.
I wanted to have a conversation with you about an issue that is in the news again, and it's been in the news almost every day. And it's an issue that I think a lot of people have a hard time talking about, abortion. And I wanted to have I wanted to have a talk with you because, Melissa, I'm sure that you and I probably don't see eye to eye on this issue, but I wanted to talk about it with you because I wanted to learn why you think the way you think on this issue of abortion. Tell me, start here. What is your view on, I'm assuming you're pro-choice, but you and I have never really talked about it. Where are you on the issue of abortion broadly and personally, every which way? Let's start there.
You know, I was raised both Catholic and Episcopalian. I was raised Catholic, and then my mother pulled me out of the church and she didn't put me anywhere, actually. She took me around to different religions and wanted me to see that there's all sorts of religions, and so there's not one right one. And her lesson to me, and this is back in the 60s and 70s, her lesson to me was, you know, there's every religion is there for a good reason, but when anyone tells you that they're the only ones with the answer, run. And so I was in the Episcopal Church, confirmed there. I was an acolyte, which is like an altar person. I was incredibly, I taught Sunday school. I was incredibly involved in it. And I've always been interested in religion, comparative religions, because I think it's in there with art. You know, it's something that we can't define and we're not supposed to define, but it's a gift. And so, you know, I have my own personal spiritual views now, having watched my parents die close up and having had some really incredible experiences. But I don't know. I have no idea what's waiting for us. I really don't know. But I believe very strongly there's something, and it's good. But because of that upbringing, I went to a very liberal Episcopalian church in Massachusetts, and still, the issue of abortion it really wasn't talked about there. But remember, 73, by the time I was in the Episcopal Church, Roe had been legalized. And I never really thought about it. And I just always assumed, no, it's wrong. You know, it's wrong to kill a baby. That was like, you know, that's the Catholic version of it. It's wrong to kill a baby.
Right.
So that was what I assumed. And then I got older and I became a teenager. And I talked about it with my mother a little bit. And because she had been an older parent, she'd almost lost me. And so she talked about how that influenced her views a little bit. But she was very pro-choice. And because she had gone to Wellesley College and she had a friend who died of an illegal abortion back in the 50s. And it was very traumatic for her. I was like a close friend. And so she was very pro-choice. When I was in high school, I believe it was my senior year. I think it was my senior. No, it was my junior year in high school. A Catholic friend of mine from a huge family. Well, you know, I think you probably know this. In huge Catholic families, there's like tons of love, but sometimes there's a little accidental neglect because there's so many. Did you ever have that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
yes,
especially
Melissa.
dads.
Yes,
Especially
completely.
dads. It's like, and I had several friends like that. And, but this particular friend called me up and she described what she had just done with her, not boyfriend, somebody she just been, and she said she didn't want it, but she was really afraid, and she, so
Yeah.
I asked my mother, what do I do to help her? And she said, well, go to the Bill Baird Center in Boston. It's across the street from the public library where my dad worked. So we took the subway in, we went in, I lived in suburban Boston, and I sort of got her through it, and it was very simple and very non-traumatic. And she, being Catholic, I'm sure she had a lot of guilt about it, but she was certain what she wanted to do. She had no doubts.
Yeah.
I mean, she was in 11th grade. She was in a huge family. Her parents would probably disown her. She didn't know. And it was somebody she barely knew, and she hadn't, it might have been a rape. We didn't call it that then, I guess. But I think then we called it letting somebody go too far. It could, because it was always your fault. But anyway, that was my first experience with it. And when I was in college, I had several friends, both in college with me and then also people I'd gone to school with and who went to different colleges, who had abortions. And I just always thought it's what you have to do. It's your life. But I think that played into the thinking that a lot of anti-abortion people have, which is that, these promiscuous college girls are running around having sex and using abortion as contraception. But that's absolutely not true. I don't know a single woman who's had an abortion who didn't agonize over it. Yeah. Even if they're certain that they didn't feel it, but knew in their gut they had to do it. But I also, my best friend got pregnant at in her late 30s and early 40s, and she had like 5 miscarriages. She had 2 kids, and one of them's my beautiful goddaughter. But she had, I guess they call it an incompetent cervix. An incompetent cervix, which is a funny description. Funny, cervix is incompetent. But but she had a couple of them were like partial, and they had to do a D&C, and they had to do, and also actually I had a cousin who had to have a D&C for some sort of other procedure. So all these things play into the fact that there's not one reason that women have abortions. It's not just because the timing isn't right. And when I was, I guess, about 30, I did I was hired by the Feminist Majority Foundation to make this film. They wanted it ready. I had like 3 weeks to make it. They wanted it ready for the Women's March, the first one. And so I literally cut it in 5 days in my living room, and it was it was just like, but it actually won an award for editing, which is kind of funny. But it was called Abortion for Survival, and it was basically abortion is necessary on a planet where there's not enough room and not enough food and not enough everything. But also, and on camera, we showed I think it was a 6-week abortion. We showed it happening. We were there. And so I saw what was definitely not a fetus. I mean, there were a lot of cells that were becoming a fetus, but they weren't. I mean, there was no viability whatsoever. And that was interesting. Yeah. And then I did a lot of research for that. And I interviewed a lot of doctors who had watched women die on the operating table in the 60s. And I interviewed people who'd lost people. And for the second documentary I did for them, we did the story, because the parental consent law, we did the story of this beautiful girl, and she was like the perfect, blonde, white, middle class, good girl who got pregnant, but she was such a good girl, she felt like she could not disappoint her parents. So she went across state lines and got an illegal abortion, and she died. And this is in 1992.
Okay.
And her parents were devastated. And they were like, of course we would have been upset, but we would have supported her. They feel so guilty that she had that impression of her, and it changed their whole vision of it. So there's so many reasons that a woman could need an abortion. I always thought, well, I would never have one. I didn't have that. I mean, I'm now past that, but, like if I got pregnant tomorrow, I'd consider it like a blessing, but I also would want to go to the doctor and find out at my advanced age, is this child going to have a spine? Is this child going to have a brain stem?
Yeah.
I mean, because it's, it gets harder and harder as you get older. And also the age of the father matters too.
Right.
But which we've been told it doesn't, but it does actually. It does matter.
So Melissa, you are firmly, and you've been most of your adult life, pro-choice. Yes. And I'm even more pro-choice now. And I see it as a public health issue, not a moral issue, because again, you can't predict the complications that can happen with any pregnancy. Something like 50 to 80% of all fertilized eggs die within the first couple days. I mean, so I would say, God is like the most busy abortionist in town but part of the reason they do is because there's something wrong and your body knows it. And you can have a miscarriage at 6 weeks that your body knows this is not going to work. And also the whole thing between miscarriages and abortions. I mean, my best friend had what some super far right people might call an abortion, but it wasn't an abortion. It was taking out the remains of a very advanced pregnancy that had died inside her, and she was devastated. And that's the whole thing about late-term abortions. They're so rare. They are so rare, and they only happen to people who have the nursery all decorated and have the names picked out and had their bridal. I mean, they happen to people who wanted the baby. They're devastating, but they still had to have them. So back up for a moment then. One more quick question. Then when Roe was overturned last year in the Dobbs decision, your reaction was what?
Well, I kind of expected it, knowing the makeup of the Supreme Court and knowing what the long-term goal. I've been told by Republicans for a long time that, we really don't want Roe overturned because that's our carrot. That's how we keep the evangelicals, which I thought was interesting. And it's like, well, you just lost your carrot there. But, now they have trans people. Now that's the carrot, And
by the way, Melissa, coming from the pro-life side, I no longer call myself that. That's accurate. I'd say most Republicans railed against Roe, overturned Roe for years to raise money and get elected. Most of them never expected it to happen. Right. Well, I unfortunately did expect it. And I remember in 1990 when I did the first film, we expected it to happen. And in the Women's March, we took my film and we gave it to every member of Congress. And do you remember Christina Pickles? She was the actress on CBS. She hosted it, narrated it, and she was wonderful. She's incredibly, dignified, and that was our thesis was basically this is a public health issue. This is healthcare, and you'll see women saying abortion is healthcare, and it is. It is, and the myth of young girls running around in college and just going crazy, that's not a thing, first of all, and never was a thing. There was a rise in abortions after Roe was legalized. But by the time Obama left office, it was coming down. It was way down. It was below pre-Roe. Yeah, it was below pre-Roe, which were, nobody said what they were. Yeah. It was coming way down. And part of the reason was contraception, education, and rising circumstances have a lot to do with it. So you may not, I think my history. I'm generally very libertarian. In most of my early adult life, I was pro-choice because I didn't want the government involved at all. And then I did research and prayer and discernment. And I became pro-life because my light bulb was that's a life in there. And there's a point where society needs to protect that life. So in most of my public life, I've been pro-life. I stopped calling myself pro-life, Melissa, because as you know, my side used that terminology as a weapon, as if Melissa Joe is not pro-life, as if you don't value life, which is bullshit. Both sides value life.
Yeah.
And that's why this whole partial abortion lie makes me so angry, because the people who are having that kind of late, horrible, horrible thing happen to them are the people usually who wanted the baby the most. And it breaks my heart because, you know, my very best friend went through it 5 times. And it's one thing I can tell you about the pro-life movement was in the 90s. I joined Clinic Defense in Los Angeles, and I was like the stunt driver. I was the driver to get us to the clinic before the Right to Life people got there. Sunday mornings, you know, like 4 a.m., we'd be like out there, and our job was to escort people into the clinics because they were being harassed. And they were being harassed by some mean people. I mean, they must have had the whole Notre Dame football team. These were big guys. I would come back with like bruises all up and down from being, you know, because they would try to break our line and then they would try to like physically. And there was one occasion, and I remember this was the same occasion where Daryl Gates showed up on his horse with a bunch of horse police. Yeah, it was just, but it was, I believe it was in South LA. It was a clinic. And, you know, these clinics, first of all, usually are for people who can't afford their, you know, fancy gynecologists on the West Side. And it was a Hispanic mother and father, and she was pregnant. She wanted to be pregnant, and she thought she was having a miscarriage. And she could not get into the clinic. And we had to escort her back to the car and call another hospital. And because she couldn't get into the clinic to see her doctor because these people were screaming at her and calling her a baby killer, and the harassment that I saw these women go through, and some of them were probably going in for a pap smear because those clinics, that's what they're for. But, you know, I feel like when a part of me felt judged for being pro-choice because, you know, oh, you're a baby killer. But no, absolutely not. And most people on my side are not like, also that the abortion on demand thing, that's actually a Republican term. You know, I demand an abortion.
Oh, yeah.
It's terrible wording. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's one of those terms that was created by Republicans, and Democrats picked it up because the far left tends to do that.
Well, you're right. So much of this, Melissa, so much of this is marketing, as you know so well. The whole pro-life moniker has been very effective. I think the pro-choice moniker is very effective as well. But let me, and neither you or I are policy experts, and I don't want to be a policy expert, but here we are, Roe's overturned, everything's been returned to the states. What, in your mind, what should this country's abortion policy be? What should it be?
I think it should be, well, first of all, your federal tax dollars were never paying for abortions unless it was rape, incest, or the mother's about to die for Medicaid. The federal dollars were gone after the Hyde Amendment. It was up to your state, really, and most of the states that are the most anti-choice did not allow that payment. So, you know, your tax dollars in Massachusetts will go to a woman with Medicaid, but they won't go in Alabama. And that's been true for a long time. So the argument, my tax dollars from people living in the conservative states, is totally faulty.
What would you do if you were president of the United States, my dear, and you had unlimited power to just decree this is what America will do with the issue of abortion? What would you do?
I would make it legal. I would make it, I would consult with, instead of a bunch of Republican judges, I would consult with the AMA and the National Institutes of Health as to safety, levels of viability. And I've also, by the way, I've been in a preemie ward when I was working for Rescue 911. We went and did a preemie ward ride along, and it was just really awful. I mean, we didn't get a story. We got one story, I think, out of it, but it just because, I mean, these babies were, it was like, a whole ward full of babies, and almost all of them, but 2 were dying because they were trying best to make them viable. And boy, those parents wanted those babies alive. They wanted them alive. I think, this also, part of this goes into the whole way that Fox News viewers and, Rush Limbaugh listeners and Mark Levine listeners and all that, it goes to how they have characterized people who are pro-choice. They characterize them as frivolous and bloodthirsty and
baby killers,
people who don't care about life or babies or whatever. And a big beef I have with the Democratic Party is that they started this characterization years ago, and Democrats never defined themselves.
Right.
And that has been a huge problem. And I see it now with a newer generation of Democrats in Congress, like Hakeem Jeffries. He is starting to define us. Those wonderful guys in Tennessee, they're starting to define us. What do we really mean? I mean, those guys are both very religious men.
Well, Melissa, you and I have talked about this. I'm not a Democrat. I used to engage in the culture wars. Republicans are very effective in this culture war bullshit, and Democrats don't punch back or fight back enough.
I feel that way. And, one of the reasons I made the film was to do a kind of persuasion, it's like soft persuasion where people connect with empathy instead of with facts and logic. And the facts and logic are in there, but they're played through human stories, so you identify with people. And I have heard at least one group of people who changed some family members' minds because of Chris Gibbs, because they were farmers. They identified. And that's why I wanted a variety of people, so they could identify with somebody and then see, okay, I get it now. And maybe that's why I voted for him, maybe that's why. But
so, Melissa, abortion should be legal. It's a woman's right to choose. Is there a point in a pregnancy where that life, that separate life, is viable or whatever, but that life needs to be protected? Like, is there a point in your mind?
I don't think the state should be involved in it. I think only medical doctors should be involved in it, to be honest. I just don't think it's any of the state's business. I mean, I believe the AMA should have guidelines, and those guidelines may mean, we won't do an abortion after 21 weeks unless it's absolutely necessary, or, whatever they decide in terms of their ethics, because they take the oath to protect life.
Yeah.
But also, what's so scary about this no abortion, no how attitude is it turns women into less than humans. And, I know if your wife were on the table and somebody asked you, her or your baby that was going to kill her, even if you've done the nursery, dressed it up, which would you choose? Would you say, just kill him? I mean, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it. And people did it, in the Puritan days a lot. That's why, so many women die in childbirth. But, they were hoping to get a boy is what was happening.
Right.
It's true.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Maybe
where,
it's a boy,
hey, Melissa, that's where I get troubled. Only in that, and it's interesting you say the state shouldn't be involved, and I respect that. But if that's a separate life and it could live outside the mother, whether it's the AMA or the state, somebody should protect that life.
I think that should be a medical guideline. And, the state maybe could back it up. Like if somebody didn't want it, they could back it up. But nobody should be going to jail. Nobody should be executed. I mean, that's like the opposite of pro-life. And the way that I guess what's been so obvious in this thing is that they don't want to prevent abortions because they're going after birth control in a lot of states. They don't want to prevent them. So they want no abortions, but they don't want to prevent them. What they want is women under control, and especially white women. And they want, I mean, if you really wanted to prevent abortions, you would have birth control available, like free or super low cost. You would have good sex ed, if not from the schools, from parents. And you would have, but there's another element to it, which is toxic male culture and empowering girls. Because there's girls in parts of America who don't believe that they're worth anything. And when they have a husband and a baby, they think they're worth something. Or when they have a boyfriend and a baby, they think they're worth something. And they're so unprepared to be moms. And some of them are rape victims. Some of them, the dads just don't want anything to do with it. It's really true. I mean, this is really, there's a lot of small town America where the girls have no hope of ever getting out. And getting out doesn't mean leaving town. Getting out sometimes means, I'm going to start my own business in town. But they just don't feel like full human beings. And I think that making abortion illegal is actually contributing to that. Because
it's interesting, Melissa. I'll push back a little. Coming from the pro-life side, I would say that most people I know on that side are in it because they genuinely want to protect the life of a baby.
I hear that. And that's why it took me so long to come around to the position I'm at. I do believe that.
And I know many of them can be extreme with that. And I know there are many pro-life people who then don't support efforts once a baby's born to take care of those lives. I agree there's plenty of inconsistency, and you're right in that there's other religious beliefs that many of them have that oppose birth control, and that's kind of messed up.
I mean, I come from, on my dad's side, a Catholic family, Irish and French Catholic. And no, everybody uses birth control. It's a big family. And, first generation immigrants and, first generation Americans. And they are, nobody ever, I don't think in my family ever stressed out over using a condom because, and the church even knows that really.
So what if Melissa Jo, if you and I were in charge, if Biden put us in a room for a weekend and said, figure it out, what if you and I said, a woman has a right to choose, unfettered rights, stay away until a certain point. Let's decide what that point is.
Bring in the doctors to decide that and the scientists, and let's see evidence. Let's do it evidence-based. Let's not just say, 10 weeks would be good, 6 weeks would be good, because that's what's happening now. And
bring in the experts.
I actually co-wrote a book on pregnancy with 3 OBGYNs, and
oh wow.
It's called The Mommy Doc's Guide to Pregnancy. It's really good, actually. It's really good.
Cool.
But it goes into like the 10th trimester. I mean, the fourth trimester, which is usually a shock to women, and nobody ever prepares you for that. But there's a lot of great research and great science, and doctors, you bet they're trying to keep embryos, fetuses alive longer, because that's what they're there for, to save lives, to produce lives. So let's see how far they've gotten. Let's see what the reality is. The reality is not necessarily the heartbeat. That's actually not a heart that's beating in that heartbeat law. That's actually like, it's some sort of cellular process that's happening, or breathing. I don't know exactly what right at the top of my head, but
Right.
it's something else. And, you can call it a heartbeat. It's like, oh, the baby has a heartbeat. Well, your heart isn't formed yet. Your lungs aren't formed yet. Your brain is not formed yet. I mean, you can't.
What should that point be, Melissa? Like, where should the point? Like, if we brought in your experts, and your experts said, "Okay, from this point forward, we'll put some restrictions on because there's a life there." Is that a genuine heartbeat? Is it the point of viability? I mean, what should it be?
I think if the baby can exist outside the womb.
Viability.
But can exist intact, not can exist without a spine, or can exist without a brainstem, or, I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, crazy things that can go wrong, and do go wrong all the time, which is why God is the busiest abortionist in town, because he's always, getting rid of the bad seeds. And that's a good thing. I mean, our bodies know more than we do about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so viability, where at that point at which that separate life could survive intact outside the womb. But you'd be hesitant having the state involved in any kind of that process.
Well, absolutely not in a punitive way. In terms of, regulating healthcare, which the state is involved in, I think regulations are, this is where I'm not a libertarian. I think regulations are good things. I think they're very good things, because I think I think human beings, when left to our own devices, are just a mess.
It's a balance, right? In a free market capitalist way, there's a balance.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big fan of capitalism with really good guardrails. But because greed is, look, we know, if you read the Bible, you know how far back greed goes. If you read ancient Egyptian history, yes. Greed is greed.
Hey, Melissa, do you get angry? Like when I talk about abortion on Twitter or my podcast or anywhere, some women, and respectfully, say, "Joe, I love you, but you're a guy. You shouldn't even be talking about it. I don't care what you think." I respect that viewpoint. Do you think men generally should stay out of this issue? It sort of seems unfair to me, but I understand it.
I don't know. I try to be really fair to men because I don't think they're all awful. But I do think that this whole toxic masculinity, movement right now, which is basically a movement to destroy anybody who, actually shows you that they have a heart. You're a cuck.
Yeah.
I certainly think men whose point of view is purely religious should stay out of it. I don't think.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, if you're a scientist and you're not coming from a religious point of view, I mean, in the Jewish religion, it's mandatory to save the life of the mother.
Yeah.
And so, you're coming from a Christian point of view. Well, you're actually violating somebody else's religion by saying no, let her bleed. So why?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Let's leave it to men of science and women of science and doctors, and they can work with the state in what is fair, what is right, what is, if you're going to have an abortion at 8 months, you're not choosing it.
And again, for the record, Melissa knows that this, and everybody knows this, the vast majority of abortions in this country are before 6 weeks and before 12 weeks. So we're talking about a minority number of abortions later on beyond that. Melissa, tell me if you agree with me. Now that Roe's been overturned and it's all back in the States, even many Republicans, because I hear from them, are uncomfortable with some of what's going down in these extreme red states. I think eventually we're going to get to where a place kind of where you and I are talking. It could be messy.
But are
Listen,
you hopeful
I'll
that
talk
we'll get
about
there?
this all the time because, like I said, I've evolved in my view of it. And I evolved to look at it as a public health issue and a
Yeah.
private health issue also. And did you have to have abortion that's legal? And, in some undeveloped countries where it's not either not legal or not accessible, they have whole wards full of women dying of their own, trying to miscarry themselves. Because women have always known, and most of those cases, by the way, are in places where women don't have the autonomy to say no to their husbands,
Right.
and they have like 7 children already, and their children are starving. And what if the moral thing is to have an abortion when you have 7 children, one of whom might die if you have another?
So, that's interesting, Melissa. That's very interesting. See, this to me is what's always makes this issue so unique. I think you and I generally agree. I don't want the government telling a man or a woman what to do with their body. But I'm a hypocrite because when it comes to abortion, I kind of do in a way, because what makes it unique is we're talking about a separate life that's been created. And I don't know what to do with that.
But when does it become a life? And, if it becomes a life at 6 months, you're putting somebody in jail for having an abortion at 5 months.
But you're right. I don't want to put anybody in jail. So, yeah.
Right. That's why I really believe that, if we're raising doctors and scientists who are ethical people, which I think is important, and I think it's often neglected in their education, if we are bringing up a generation of doctors who are ethical people, no matter what their religion or non-religion, they are going to decide that what's right for life, period. That would be the woman and the baby or embryo. And, some of these, what was the doctor? There was a guy in Texas who wanted to reimplant ectopic pregnancies. Remember that?
Oh, I didn't hear. I missed that.
Oh, there was he put a line. It might have passed before, he got really shot down, I think, by the medical profession. But yeah, he basically said, even if it's ectopic pregnancy, we'll just, go in and reimplant it. But an ectopic pregnancy, once it's an ectopic pregnancy, it's not a pregnancy anymore because
Right.
it can't, it's a cell that can't get the nourishment it needs to grow. So it's gone.
You know politics well. How do you think these next few years are going to play out? How's this issue going to play out?
It depends on which way we go as a country. I think I'm very scared about the Supreme Court. I think they've totally gone rogue. I think everything we've learned about Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas shows us that, there's no, the law is we are a nation of laws, not men, right? Or are we? Are we a nature of men who make laws because that's what they believe?
It should be the former. It should be the former.
Right. And right now it's not. It isn't. Not in the Supreme Court anyway. And that scares me a lot.
But what do you do? Someone who's as passionate as you are, as much as this Supreme Court may disgust you, when they make a ruling, it's still the law of the land until the legislature does something. Like you're not advocating ignoring court rulings. Or maybe you are protesting.
Protesting? Civil disobedience, if it's not violent,
Yes.
is often a very good thing.
A long history of civil disobedience in this country.
If it doesn't hurt other people. I understand that there's people who believe abortion is wrong, at any time. And I respect that they believe that, but that's for them. That's for them. And
Melissa, that's a great point. That's a great point because most pro-life people do believe from the moment of conception, that's a life. And if you kill that life, that's murder. And the difficulty for them is to understand that not everybody thinks that way.
Well, they want to make us think that way, and, at pain of prison. And it just isn't going to work because, women, we know our own bodies best, and it's a biological process. It's not necessarily, Michelangelo, the creation. It's a biological process, and there's very many development steps that cell has to go through to even make it to the uterus.
Right.
So it's to force that view. If you have that view, God bless you, but to force that view on everyone is at pain of imprisonment. Is we're going back to the Puritans. I've been studying the Puritans lately because I'm studying the Salem witch trials, and I mean, even the Puritans would have allowed an abortion, I think, at some point.
You and I've talked. My former political party is on a dangerous road right now, and they need to be stopped. I guess, and you'll probably disagree with me, I'm glad it was returned to the states. I think the states, through the American people, are going to get to where you and I want them to get, which is a woman has an unfettered right to choose up until a point of viability. I like your idea of experts and medical people and scientists determining what that is. I think, and Melissa, when you look at the midterms and even in some red states, Republicans are voting against these extreme measures.
They are. Here's the problem. Have you read David Pepper's Laboratories of Autocracy?
Yeah, good book.
It's incredible. And it really, it's so funny. So it's so prescient for what just happened in Tennessee.
Yeah.
It turns out that 57% of the Republicans in that legislature weren't even in competitive elections. They either didn't have an opponent or they only had they only got primaried. And when you get to that point, especially if you're in a state house and you're anonymous, because nobody knows who's in the state house, right? I mean, a few of us know, but I don't know everybody who's in the New York State House. They can just do whatever they feel like doing, and it takes. You know this because you're sort of. you ran for office, and I hope you run for office again because I think all the wisdom you've been gleaning over these years have just made you such a. Well, you always.
What if I ran, Melissa? What if I ran as a super conservative Democrat?
You could win a state like West Virginia. As long as you didn't let somebody buy you, you could win a state like West Virginia or somewhere like that. There's sort of purplish states where, but the problem is if you got primaried by an extremist. The Republican base is getting smaller and more extreme. That's the problem. It's a really sick cycle that's happening, and the Democrats let it happen. But now it's not like you can't blame them 100% for what's going on now. They did let it happen.
You're right, and I do think Democrats are learning now how to fight back. I think they finally recognized what we're up against, that my former party is pretty fully anti-democracy. I think Democrats are finally getting that. And I know, Melissa, you and I've talked about this. My former party is really middle-aged and older white people, and they're not replacing themselves. They're becoming a minority party, like a regional rural party. But the way the country's set up, they can still do well.
But that's why, yeah, exactly. That's why so many of them are embracing extremist groups, super, AK-47s for everybody and restrictive laws on CRT, all that crazy stuff. Because that's the young people for them are, alt-right, militia. I mean, the
Yeah.
militia guys are all our age. I think
Yeah.
most of them
Yes.
are. Some of them in their 40s or 30s, but
Yeah. They're our age.
a lot of them are our age, and in no shape to storm the Capitol.
Are you generally hopeful, or are you still pessimistic in how the country is going to work through this issue of abortion? Or are you hopeful?
That's a good question. I think a lot of that actually depends on the world stage too, because as authoritarianism rises, if it gets more footholds, one of the first things that authoritarians do and fascists do is put controls on women. It's one of the first things they do. And, there'll be a lot more stuff after that. There'll be birth control, and there'll be, lowering the age of marriage to 12. And there'll be all sorts of stuff that, is designed to put us back into a place where, we weren't even meant to be there in the beginning. It's hard for somebody who was raised liberal and who believes in the Enlightenment values and progress and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And to really see that there's any good in going back like that. I mean, going back to the American family, great. But that's a family thing. You have to do that yourself. You can't mandate that.
They want, Melissa, I've had too many Republicans tell me over the last 6 years, they want to go back to the 1950s. They want a simple white America where the rules were simple and men married women and women married men. And
well, the rules were simple for men, white men. They weren't simple for everyone else,
Exactly.
And for anybody to think that Black people are in any way inferior to white people. And I've actually talked to people who say, well, that IQ test back in 1970, which was totally warped. But, just look at the politicians that we have right now on the national stage and locally who are Black. They are head and shoulders. Those guys, those young guys in Tennessee were head and shoulders above their compatriots, their comfortable Republican compatriots, the good old boys. I mean, those guys couldn't form a sentence compared to these guys. There's such extraordinary excellence. And then when you think of what it takes in terms of excellence for them to beat out a white guy, I know you'll hear from people the opposite, but it's still not true. I mean, you still have, women too, we still have obstacles. I mean, I faced a lot of them. I'm a lot older, but I faced a lot of obstacles, and didn't get the career I wanted. And part of it was because I was female, but I got something good anyway. And you can't change the time period in which you live. You can only do the best you can in it. And, if you look at women through history, some of them have done amazing things being totally repressed. So, Joan of Arc, who's, a real person. People make their way, and, you're born into a period of time and you do your best with it.
Melissa, Jo, I want to make 2 points for the record, and I want to reiterate this. Melissa, Jo values life every bit, if not more than I do. People on both sides of the abortion debate value life. I'm sick and tired of one side calling themselves pro-life. We're all pro-life. And then the second point is, Melissa, I've really enjoyed this because even if, like, you and I have different mindsets on this issue, we kind of found a little bit of a compromise. And I find that encouraging. And by the way, I think that's where most Americans are ultimately at on this issue. Like, most Americans don't want to ban abortion from day one. And most Americans don't want, pardon my language, abortions on demand until, most Americans are right where you are, I think.
I think, yes, absolutely. And again, you have no clue. We can't even imagine the number of possibilities of reasons a woman might need an abortion or want an abortion. And that's her business. And unless it's some butchery, which doesn't happen. But see, that it doesn't happen because women know they have to get abortions early if they're going to have one. Usually, if they're making up their mind, if they're waiting to make up their mind, they usually actually do want to have the kid. And the ones who have those late-term abortions are the ones who are the most broken by them because they want a child. Yeah. So all these stereotypes about women who, want abortions just because they want to have fun is insane. And I think,
Follow her. Keep going. I cut you off. Keep going.
Yeah.
You had a thought.
Oh, no, I just, I think that young people today kind of feel that way. And I think that, Gen Z is really clear. They're not like running around promiscuous. They're really clear on what's important in the world. They really are.
Well, and my former political party is in a lot of trouble with Gen Z, and that's only going to get worse. Follow this lady on Twitter, Melissa Jo. Follow her on Twitter.
I'm also on Mastodon and Post, although I'm still trying to fight my way through Twitter. I hope it doesn't completely get destroyed.
Don't you leave Twitter yet.
I'm not leaving yet. I almost did. I got, he booted me out for a couple of weeks. But
I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's terrible what he's doing. It's terrible what he's doing. But you know what? It is his company, and he can do what he wants with his own company. That's capitalism.
It is, and I wish he'd sell it.
I'm okay with that, and we can all leave too.
And do me a favor, check out Melissa's 2021 documentary. I'm in it. The Game is Up. Disillusioned Trump voters tell their stories. You'll absolutely love it. White Flag with Joe Walsh. Check out my YouTube page. You can listen and watch this whole episode. Listen to this wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify and Apple. Follow me on Twitter at Walsh Freedom. Melissa Jo, I love you. I'm a big fan. I mean that.
Likewise, you are. I can see even since
I'm honored that we become friends.
Me too. I'm so proud to call you and Helene friends. Really.
Well, and I wanted to listen to you on this issue. In the last 45 minutes, you've taught me things on this issue. And I will say, Melissa Jo, I think you and I probably love dogs more than anybody on the planet. Easily.
I'd rather be with my dogs is my shirt.
I love that. Hey, Melissa Jo, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.